Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my channel. Mireille Nicole here, relationship coach. In today's video, we're going to talk about boundaries. This is actually going to be a two-part series. I'm going to do another video on boundaries after this one. In today's video, we're going to talk about what are boundaries, what are they not, and why you should have certain boundaries in your relationship. But first, if you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, please take 5 seconds to do that now and click that notification bell. All right, let's dive in. What are boundaries? Boundaries are standards or conditions that you set for yourself out of self-love to ensure you stay in integrity with your values in your relationship and can keep showing up as the best version of you in love. So this is how I define boundaries. And the main key takeaway I want you to leave with is that boundaries are about you and they are up to you. And what I mean by that is that they do not seek to control anyone. You're not trying to change anyone else's behaviors. They're not rules, and they exist regardless of anyone else's behaviors or actions. So they are not meant to be threats or ultimatums. You create them and you enforce them, and it's all about you. So this is probably the biggest misconception about boundaries and where there's the most confusion. So for example, telling your husband you need to do more chores around the house, that's telling someone what to do. Or even saying something like, you need to do your share around the house or else, and insert consequence there. That's trying to control someone or giving them an ultimatum. And that's not a boundary. He'll just see that as bossy or nagging him, regardless of whether or not you are right about him doing his share or not. It's a moot point. All right. A boundary would be something more like, if I notice I'm doing most of the work around the house, then I'll look into how I could get more help and maybe hire help. And I realize if that's not feasible financially, maybe your boundary would be something simple like, I feel overwhelmed by all the housework. I'm only going to vacuum the floor every second week or every third week, or whatever a downgrade would be in your situation, so that you are no longer building that resentment over the situation and that you have time for more self-care. So it's not about telling anyone what to do. The word you doesn't even appear in those examples that I provided. It's all about what you personally stand for, what you're willing to tolerate in your relationship, and what you're going to do about it. Boundaries can be internal or external. And what I mean by that is that you don't always have to communicate your boundaries. Some are just for you to act upon. So they are boundaries between you and you. And this is actually where you want to start with boundaries. I see a lot of women who jump right into external boundaries, but you want to get really good with the internal ones first, because they will make external boundaries a lot easier to enforce and more successful. So put you first, start with you. And examples of internal boundaries would be something like, keeping promises to yourself, being really consistent with your goals. Or a concrete example would be, let's say, for example, something happens at work or just during the day as you're taking care of stuff around the house, something goes wrong and you're disappointed with yourself. For example, for leading or causing whatever happened. An internal boundary just for yourself could be something like, you know what, I'm not going to let this ruin my day. So practice being really good at that type of boundary first. External boundaries obviously are going to be between you and other people. So between you and your man or your husband, your partner, the man you're dating. External boundaries can be communicated in a couple different ways, and I'll give you just a few examples for these. So one of the ways I like to think of boundaries, and this is boundaries with a consequence attached to them, or something that you're telling to the other person what you're going to do if you experience that's boundary that's being crossed, that boundary that is being crossed. So I would use the structure, if I, then I. All right. An example of this would be, let's say you're having a fight, you and your man or your husband, your partner, you're in a fight, you're having an argument, you're disagreeing about something, and you feel that it's getting really heated. In the past, maybe in your arguments, there's been name calling, and you've decided to set a boundary that you're not going to tolerate that. So your boundary that you would communicate could be something like, if I see that our argument escalates to name calling, then I'm going to take a break and we can resume the conversation later. So you're not telling the other person not to call you names. You're not punishing him, for doing that. It's not so much telling him what to do. It is what you are going to do. So if you experience that situation of name calling, if if there's name calling, you experience that, then you are going to leave. You're not asking anyone else to do anything. And another example, if you're not ready to enforce the boundary, that's really important. And that's what we're going to talk about in part 2 of this video. You can just simply use an I statement as your boundary and say something like, it makes me uncomfortable being called those names. All right. So you're just telling the person what you're not comfortable with, what you're not, what's going against your value, what you're not up to tolerate. But maybe at this point you don't enforce it yet, because maybe you're not ready to do that yet. And in the next video, I tell you why it's so important to enforce those boundaries. If you're not going to enforce those boundaries, you're better off not giving a consequence or explaining what you're going to do in response if you're not going to follow through. Let's talk about a few reasons why you'd want to set boundaries. Boundaries are often talked about in situations of toxic, narcissistic relationships and family dysfunction, in cases where addiction is problematic. So to be honest, boundaries are not my favorite topic to talk about, right? I'm here to help you have your happily ever after, your fairy tale ending. And most of the time, what I just listed is not what is associated with that fairy tale ending you're looking for. But the main reason you're going to want to establish boundaries is to reduce those negative feelings, that resentment, frustration, and expectation you feel towards your man, right? It's a tool that helps you keep your power. You're still independent. You're your own person. You're self-differentiated. You're not getting lost in the relationship. And you're not codependent on your man's actions or behaviors. Another main reason why I just talked about, right, would be relationships where there's dysfunction in there. There's narcissism, like I said, addiction, that sort of situation, right, where it's not possible to necessarily communicate in other healthy, positive ways because you don't have normal circumstances, quote unquote. All right. And also you can start using boundaries if there are situations where you've tried communicating positively, you've tried asking for what you want, you've tried some of those more loving, let's just say more loving ways of expressing yourself, and you're not getting results. So that could be another reason for you to implement boundaries. And you're going to want to do those in a very loving, positive way, productive way. And also some of the other results you're going to get from enforcing boundaries and setting the boundaries, enforcing them, is that you're going to feel more self-confident. You're going to feel more self-respect, more self-worth for yourself because you're following through. That's what's going to give you confidence. You know you can count on yourself. You know you have your back. You know that no matter what happens with whoever out there, you're safe, right? You're safe because of yourself. You've got you. And also, if there's any possibility of change with your man, and I know, we all know we can't change a man, and I talk about that too. I totally agree. But if there's any chance of your dynamic changing, right, it's going to be with healthy and well executed boundaries to support that. Rules telling him to change and punishing him if he doesn't do or act in a certain way, this is not going to support change at all. We cannot change or control people. Men will either resist our efforts or they'll double down their efforts just to prove that we can't control them. Men may also punish us for making them do something that they don't want to do or be something they don't want to be. So the only person you can ever change is yourself. And the only person is your business really changing is yourself. So let's do a quick recap before I wrap up this video. Boundaries are standards or conditions that you set for yourself out of self-love, right? They are about you and they are up to you. They can be internal or they can be external. And some of the reasons you'll want to have boundaries is if you find yourself in a toxic relationship, to protect your own emotional world and to stay in your power. If you know that boundaries are currently an issue in your relationship, I go much deeper into this topic and guide women through the work in my Happily Ever After boot camp. And when you join boot camp, you have access to a ton of training videos on so many different topics related to relationships, dating, and preparing for love after divorce. I do live Q&As to answer your questions during the week and coach you through the work. So reach out to me if this is something that would be of interest to you. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below, and I'd love to hear your feedback. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.